Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, aka the guy who always expects the expected, and it's time to Ragnarok and roll as episode 2 of Loki is now out worldwide. As always, we're going to be breaking down the entire episode's plot, pointing out all the devil in the details, including some big Easter eggs and things that you might have missed. We'll also be giving our review of the series so far and how it stacks up next to WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier, so make sure you stick around until the end game. Now first up, I think we have to address the big reveal in the episode, which is that the Loki variant is actually Lady Loki, played by Sophia Di Martino. When the show was filming, this was leaked, and we can now pretty much confirm that the person everyone thought was Black Widow in the trailers is actually her. When we first meet her, one of her horns is cut in half, and this is a reference to Agent of Asgard, in which the character had something similar on his crown. I actually got access to the first 2 episodes of the show, so I didn't want to spoil it in my last breakdown, but I was really surprised at how many people who also got the same privileges just out and out said that it was her to pass it off as a theory. I even watched one where they said it could be her, and then started using she pronouns for the rest of the video. What the bloody hell is wrong with you? We're never getting early access again.
Nope.
All that for a drop of clout. Now, from this point onwards, I'm going in as blind as you guys and Daredevil, and this episode has a lot to theorize about it. Now, we open in Oshkosh, Wisconsin in the year 1985 at a Renaissance fair. 1985 is the year that Back to the Future was set, and similar to that film, we get an adventure that involves our heroes travelling to the past and future. I love how they have this idea here that people are dressing up like the past in an attempt to relive it. The TVA are literally able to do this and can appear at any point in time, and there's some really cool Easter eggs at this location. Now firstly, we see the Dragonfly Armory, which could be a nod to Dragonfly, an armoured character from the Marvel Universe. Next we get what I think is a cameo of Agatha Harkness, before the big reveal in WandaVision that it was Agatha all along. We noticed that Agnes never really flinched when Wanda performed magic in front of her, and this was because stuff like that didn't surprise the character. The TVA step out of a temporal doorway in front of her here, but rather than being shocked at that, she's annoyed they aren't wearing traditional medieval attire. Agatha is, however, and it looks similar to style to what she wore in Salem. Agatha of course was alive during the period that this festival is celebrating, so I think it's hilarious that she's gone to one just to feel more at home. Now the actress is Kate Berlant and not Catherine Hahn, but if people can go wild over Peggy Carter, then we can go bloody wild over this. Clickbait, clickbait, clickbait. Now Agatha is of course a big bad villainess in the MCU, and it's not too long before we come across another one in a tent. This is Lady Loki, who uses her mind control powers to turn C-20, played by Sasha Lane, against the other Minutemen. She kicks the crap out of them to I Need a Hero by Bonnie Tyler, which sort of sets up how the TVA need a hero in order to take on Lady Loki. Thus they have turned to a variant of her in Loki, who will no doubt go from villain to hero as we progress through the show. She steals one of the TVA's time doorway devices, and on this we can see that there's a directory, settings panel, time door, and an icon of Miss Minutes. No idea what that last one does, but speaking of her, I forgot to mention last week that she's actually voiced by Tara Strong, who you might know as being someone that provided the original voice of Harley Quinn, and she's responsible for pretty much creating her signature sound. In Thor and Loki Double Trouble issue 3, Lady Loki actually gained a device that allowed her to jump across dimensions, and I feel that this is very much pulling from that comic. Lady Loki takes C-20, and we cut to the title screen, which is in black and white just like the last time. The letters constantly shift as a nod to the different versions of Loki, and our Mephisto obsession last week blinded us from the fact that one has devil horns which are supposed to represent his helmet. Cut to Loki reading a jet ski magazine, and he's being quizzed by Miss Minutes on what happens when a Nexus event breaches a red line. This is a very important line of dialogue, as we learn that it means the TVA can't reset the timeline and a branch is created. This leads to the destruction of the timeline and the fall of reality as we know it, but let's be honest, yeah, we've lived through 2020, love. I think we can handle a little destruction of reality. Now episode 1 was full of old tech, and on the desk we can see an old League Siegler, which are now no longer produced. The Miss Minutes hologram responds to Loki, even though it's a recording, and this is likely because she's already aware of the conversation due to her knowledge of time. If you've ever seen the Doctor Who episode Blink, then you'll know that someone was able to have a conversation with the Doc on a TV with footage that was recorded decades before because he already knew their responses due to them making notes on the conversation that they had whilst talking to the recording. This was then given to the Doc, and it's a lot of timey-wimey wibbly-wobbly stuff, but I feel that Miss Minutes is sort of doing the same thing. Don't know if that made sense or if I explained it well, which I probably didn't, but moving on. Now Mobius says there's been an attack and he gives him a TVA jacket with variant printed on the back. Turns out Mobius's desk is just along from Casey, who he threatened to gut like a fish, which I forgot to point out was a nod to Scream. Now the jet ski has a lot of meaning, as it's clear that Mobius wants to ride one off into the sunset. He very much reminisces on the 1990s to Loki at the end of the episode, and it turns out that he's never ridden one. Now Mobius has such a strong impression of the 90s, and this could be a nod to the character actually debuting in 1991. Mobius says he can't go off and do it because it would create a branch timeline, but I do feel the season will end with him riding one off into the sun. All the TVA members are pretty much slaves, and whether they're reduced to just being a number or not even knowing what a fish is, it's clear that they're indoctrinated into believing that they have a purpose when really there's no reason for them to want to be alive. Now the rivalry between B-15 and Loki heats up a bit, and he calls him a cosmic mistake. When you think about it, he pretty much isn't even the main variant that we followed through the MCU, as that one is now on his way to Asgard to be locked up. Interestingly, the hologram we see of our Loki has blue skin, and this is because he is of course a frost giant. Last week the picture of the devil had a blue tongue, and the child too had one because of the kablooey. Turns out there's several variants walking around, and this includes a Tour de France winner wearing yellow just like the most recent one. However, instead of the United Arab Emirates logo on his chest, he just has Loki. We have a Hulk Loki, one that looks a lot like the Mandarin, and a Viking one. Loki of course himself is a Viking god, so this is a nice little nod to that. Loki also explains his powers, and we learn that the variants have different abilities, which is how Lady Loki is able to control others and shift this possession from person to person. They ship out to the Renaissance Fair, and Loki asks why they didn't just head back towards the attack. Turns out Nexus events destabilize the time flow, and they don't want to create even more branches, so they have to show up in real time. Loki warns them that they're in great danger and says they're underestimating this Loki variant. Hilariously, he calls them the lesser Loki throughout the episode, and she sort of does get the drop on him, showing that he underestimated her too. He talks about the legends of wolves in Asgardian history, and in Thor Ragnarok we of course came face to face with one in the form of Fenris, who is a giant wolf from Nordic culture. Loki calls the Asgardians gullible, and we know this is true as he was able to masquerade as Odin for several years without being noticed. Loki pretty much spoils the entire episode early and says that Lady Loki wants them to follow C20 so that she can spring her trap and get Loki so that they can both take down the TVA together. This is sort of what happens in the entry, but instead it's Loki who tries to recruit her to overthrow the TVA, and he very much was just playing his hand here. Who knows, he might have just revealed the entire plot of the season, and it's going to be really interesting to see if this all comes to fruition. Spoiler alert for that entire bit, and if you're enjoying the video then I'd massively appreciate the thumbs up, as we're going to be breaking down the show like this each and every week. I've also just started up a new TikTok page, so hello fellow kids, and it's got some of our best Easter eggs on that'll be linked in the description below. Now Loki sarcastically says he now worships the sacred timeline and that he can deliver the variant, but that he needs assurances he won't be wiped out when the job's over. He states he needs to speak with the timekeepers as they're in grave danger, but Mobius figures out he's lying because hey, he's Loki. Weirdly though, he was telling the truth, and because of this they might even overthrow the entire TVA in order to rule over them. The branch is pruned, and you might remember from episode 1 that this terminology could be seen on a poster. Cut to Ravonna Renslayer's office, and we see the statue of the timekeepers as well as several artifacts. Weirdly, she's recording the entire meeting, and though this might be for herself, I actually think it's either for the timekeepers or the one controlling them. Mobius says that he's never seen them before, and the way that Ravonna talks about them, it sounds like they're one person instead of three. It's them bloody pronouns I tell you. Spoiled Lady Loki, and now they're spoiling this. Now, Gugu Mbatha-Raw has discussed the show quite recently, and she said there's a lot of secrets involving her character, so we shouldn't be taking everything that we see here at face value. Since episode 1, it's been scratching away at me that Kang is behind it all, and this isn't like some Mephisto shit. As we know, the character has already been cast and is being played by Jonathan Majors. To me, you don't do the TVA without the villain in it, and if the Timekeepers are all powerful, then surely variants shouldn't be created in the first place. I think that Kang is manipulating events and that he has allowed Loki to come into the TVA to tear it apart, thus creating the multiverse. Renslayer has long been linked with him, and it just makes a lot of sense to me. Now, Mobius says he's sort of playing with this Loki, who is stalling for time, but in doing this it's allowing him to better understand the one out there in the wild, but I think he's actually got a bit of a soft spot for him. Now, this is the newest bromance since Falcon and the Baron Zemo, and though he says he's a scared little ice runt shivering in the cold, he's also a lovable dickhead like another lad around here. Now, Mobius signs an event report with a pen that we see has the words Franklin D. Roosevelt High School on it. Historically, this was one of the first schools in Dallas built for black students, and it was a key location that helped to educate black people in a time when many didn't want them to have the same rights as white people. We can also see an hourglass symbol etched into Renslayer's door, and Loki tries to work the situation to make it so it's actually a lesson in understanding him. Expect the expected when dealing with Loki, and in Thor Ragnarok, Thor finally managed to outsmart him by knowing that he would always try and betray him. Loki is told it's his last chance, and we cut to the trippy Infinity Elevator with the Timekeeper statues in front of it. This is actually a real world location, and it's the inside of the Marriott Marquis in Atlanta. Loki goes to floor 372, and it's clearly a nod to the fact that the TVA themselves debuted in issue 372 of Thor. We can also catch LK3, which was shown as a floor on the elevator panel from episode 1. We see several of these throughout the episode, making me wonder where the mysterious X and Miss Minutes floor leads to, and all this anticipation is giving me a raging hard boner fan theory idea. Now, Loki rings an old hotel bell, further showing repurposed items from our world, and we later see Casey drinking some Boku juice. This has now been discontinued and no longer exists. In this episode, Mobius also drinks a can of Just a Energy drink, which too is no longer produced, so I'm expecting to see some more products like this popping up. Loki requests all the files from the beginning of time until the end, but they're classified, and the only one he's granted is about his life. Furthermore, we see his surname Laufey's again, and this is because he's the son of Laufey and not Odin. Hiddleston shows off his acting chops once more as he reads over the destruction of Asgard at the hands of Surtur, and we see that there were 9,719 deaths caused. It's heartbreaking for him knowing that he and his people are doomed, but he realizes that disasters that lead to mass deaths are the key to finding where Lady Loki is. If one were to travel back in time to, say, Hiroshima before it was bombed, you could pretty much do what you wanted without worrying about the butterfly effect, as the entire area would be destroyed, and thus nothing in the timeline would ever change. Because of this, a Nexus event wouldn't occur, and thus the TVA would be completely unaware. Loki demonstrates this with Mobius's lunch by throwing salt in it and some Boku juice, and overall, it's better than my wife's cooking. You having that? Now, weirdly, he talks about pushing Hulk off the bridge and how it wouldn't have changed anything, but then if that had have happened, Fenris would have killed Heimdall, which would have had a knock-on effect. I know that most of the Asgardians were killed by Thanos shortly after, but I'm not sure that this example quite works. Now, Mobius is cautious because he thinks Loki will stab him in the back, and one time, when he and Thor were children, there was a part where he transformed into a snake because he knows Thor loves snakes, and he said, it's me, and stabbed him. Now, Loki denies stabbing anyone in the back, and he convinces Mobius by saying he loves to be right. They travel to 79 AD, namely Pompeii in Italy. Mount Vesuvius famously erupted there and killed the majority of the population, even freezing some of them forever in stone by the ash that formed and dried on them. There were even people who were petrified in their beds as they slept, and I definitely recommend that you check it out if you ever go to Italy. Now, the VFX team couldn't use footage of Pompeii because cameras didn't exist, allegedly, and thus they used the eruption from the 1980s St. Helens volcano as a reference on how it would act. Loki frees some goats and says, "Be free my horned friends," and his helmet is of course meant to look like the horns of a goat and also the devil. Now Loki is proven to be right, and Mobius correctly deduces that they have to be naturally occurring with no survivors. After realizing that Kablooey was only produced between certain years and that it was available at a certain location, they track Lady Loki to the Roxcott disaster. We learn that she's laying low at the Roxcott store, and due to the double X in its name, this is likely playing on the corporation Roxxon from the comics. The head of Roxxon, Dario Agger, ended up taking Loki's father's skull at one point, and he even built a church in the name of the character. Now, though not fully introduced into the MCU, they did appear on the side of a tanker in Iron Man 3 and are likely popping up at some point in the future due to Marvel pretty much running out of characters and companies that they haven't put into the MCU thus far. The team travel to 2050 and we see as a tsunami and hurricane close in on the area. I absolutely love the music here, and it really ramps up this finale to be the height of the season so far. Loki dries his clothes using magic, but he's likely still wet and just changing his outer appearance. In Thor: The Dark World, he did something similar when he was in a cell, and he projected the idea that he was okay when he looked worse than I did during the middle of lockdown. Now B-15 and Loki go together and come across someone suspiciously shopping for plants in the middle of a hurricane. We see that Lady Loki is capable of passing on her possession by touch, and it sort of draws out the mystery of who exactly she is. Now you might have seen last week that there were several reports about how Loki as a character is gender fluid, and with Loki being a Norse trickster god, this very much ties into how he can often fool people. In the comics, after the events of Ragnarok, Loki was reborn into the body of Lady Loki, and potentially this could be what happened to the character after the events of Infinity War, which of course took place almost immediately after the third Thor film. Now in the source material, they make it very clear that she is just a continuation of the original Loki. However, they've left it a bit ambiguous here. She does say things like, "If anyone's anyone, you're me," and smiles like him, but it could be a reach, and it certainly won't be the last one in this video, so something to look forward to for you guys. Now the TVA finds C-20, and Lady Loki jumps across from body to body before revealing herself. Loki says he now knows why Thor found him so annoying, and asks if she wants to join him in overthrowing the TVA in order to rule them. We see that Lady Loki has set up several reset charges around the entire building, and we learn that C-20 has given away how to find them. The episode ends with Lady Loki setting the charges to explode, and these all drop through doorways to what I'm guessing are timelines that the TVA are located at. I love how the score takes on the theme of a ticking clock here as it speeds up towards what is the apocalypse. As she steps forward, you might also notice that some of the TVs have the same zero signal display that was used during the credits of WandaVision. Now Lady Loki has a crown of thorns much like the one in the Mephisto stained glass window, and the pair flee together to who knows where. Several branches in the timeline are created that are too much for the TVA to handle, and this bombing of the sacred timeline makes Ravonna Renslayer grab her own stun stick to go out and fight. Now as for where they're going, I think that we may have already seen this in one of the trailers. In the one where it looks like Loki is speaking to Black Widow, he's likely just sat with her, and I think the pair will be discussing her life, origins, and what came to be. This is clearly at an apocalypse event that looks like what happened when the moon exploded, and potentially this might even be Titan. Thanos of course threw a moon in Infinity War, and the purple glow does look similar to what comes from the Power Stone. However, when we see the reset charges being sent to the sacred timeline, on the screen there is a listing for several locations including Vormir, Asgard, Sakaar, Ego, Hela and more. These are of course key locations in the MCU, and though the one on Vormir happens in 2301, it's clearly a very important event that could have massive ramifications. So though Black Widow did die in 2014, maybe she could be popping up again in the next episode, but we don't really know. Now interestingly, the one for Asgard goes to 2004, which is just before the events of Thor, and this could link into the King Loki moment that we saw in the trailer. For Sakaar, it's 1984, which might end up killing the Grand Master, so that the Loki events in Ragnarok happened differently, and Titan was also bombed in 1982, but no idea what that's about as the planet was likely destroyed at that point. Now, I kind of feel that Lady Loki may have come from the timeline in which it looked like the nuke struck during the Battle of New York, and this wiped out the entire city. This would send her off on a massively different tangent to what happened in the MCU, as all the Avengers, bar maybe Bruce Banner, would have been killed. I think next time we will be discovering more of the ins and outs of where she came from, and the next episode might even end with the cliffhanger of Vote Loki, with him saying, "What did you expect?" As that just seems like, something that you would end an episode on. Going from there, I think that the pair might jump about from timeline to timeline in order to build an army of Lokis to carry out their plans. There's so much going on in this episode. I think him stepping through the doorway, leaving Mobius in the dust, was a brilliant way to close things out. Now, as for my thoughts on the episode, I think this was probably a lot better than the first one, which felt a bit too heavy on the exposition and introductions. I'm someone who normally prefers things once the ball gets rolling, and it's rare that I actually like an origin story because they just sort of follow the same story beats. Last episode was very much the bad guy goes in, there could be good within him, he unlocks it and learns something new about himself. That's normally your stereotypical origin story, so to have this just hit the ground running was a lot better for me. There's a real sense of urgency to it, and actually being on location throughout time I think is much better than just sitting in the offices like we did in the last episode. Proper slagging the show off here, but last time I did compare the pilots of WandaVision, Falcon and the Winter Soldier and Loki to say what I felt was the strongest opening. For me, Falcon had the best first episode, but if we're now comparing the first two, then I think Loki far outclasses the others, as the two fell pretty flat for me on both shows. Tom Hiddleston is absolutely nailing the role, and I'm really surprised at how much I like Owen Wilson as his buddy. I'm not saying Wilson is a bad actor or anything, he's always been fun and lighthearted, I just really wasn't expecting to like him this much. We also have the arrival of the first big variant, and though I think we know what's coming down the line in terms of the others, there's still so much to enjoy. Great episode, better than the first for me, and yeah, very excited to see what's coming around the corner. Now obviously I'd love to hear your thoughts and theories, so make sure you comment below and let me know. As a thank you for interacting with the video, you'll be entered into our prize draw on the 30th of June, in which we're giving away 3 copies of the Phase 3 MCU box set. All you have to do to be on with a chance of winning is like the video, make sure you subscribe with notifications on, and drop a comment below with your thoughts on the episode. The winners of last month's competition are on screen right now, so if that's you, then message me on Twitter at Heavy Spoilers. If you want something else to watch, then make sure you check out our breakdown of the TVA, which will be linked on screen right now. We've gone over Mobius and Mobius, the Timekeepers, Kang the Conqueror, and everything you need to know about the organisation, so it's definitely worth checking out if you want to know more. With that out of the way, thank you for sitting through the video. I've been Paul, I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.